Chapter 4 Tweedledee, Chapter 4 Tweedledum and Tweedledee in Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. They were standing under a tree, each with an arm around the other's neck. And Alice knew which was which in a moment, because one of them had Dum embroidered on his collar, and the other Dee. I suppose they've each got Tweedle around the neck at the back of the collar, she said to herself. They stood so still that she quite forgot they were alive, and she was just looking round to see if the word Tweedle was written at the back of the collar, when she was startled by a voice coming from the one marked Dum. "If you think we're waxworks," he said, "you ought to pay, you know. Waxworks weren't made to be looked at for nothing, nohow." "Contrariwise," added the one marked D, "if you think we're alive, you ought to speak." "I'm sure I'm very sorry," was all Alice could say, for the words of the old song kept ringing through her head like the ticking of a clock, and she could hardly help but saying them aloud. Tweedledum and Tweedledee agreed to have a battle. "For Tweedledum," said Tweedledee, "has spoiled his new rattle." Just then flew down a monstrous crow, as black as a tar barrel, which frightened both the heroes so they forgot their quarrel. "I know what you're thinking about," said Tweedledum, "but it isn't so, nohow." "Contrariwise," continued Tweedledee, "if it was so, it might be, and if it were so, it would be, but as it isn't, it ain't. That's logic." "I was thinking," Alice said very politely, "which is the best way out of this wood? It's getting so dark. Would you tell me, please?" But the little men only looked at each other and grinned. They looked so exactly like a couple of great schoolboys that Alice couldn't help pointing her finger at Tweedledum and saying, "First boy." "No, how?" Tweedledum cried out briskly, and shut his mouth up again with a snap. "Next boy," said Alice, passing on to Tweedledee, though she felt quite certain he would only shout out "Contrariwise," and so he did. "You've been wrong," cried Tweedledum. "The first thing in a visit is to say how do you do, and shake hands." And here the two brothers gave each other a hug, and then they held out the two hands that were free to shake hands with her. Alice did not like shaking hands with either of them at first, for fear of hurting the other's feelings. So, as the best way out of difficulty, she took hold of both hands at once. The next moment they were dancing around in a ring. This seemed quite natural. She remembered playing afterwards, and she was not even surprised to hear music playing. It seemed to come from the tree under which they were dancing, and it was done, as well as she could make out, by the branches rubbing one across the other like fiddles and fiddlesticks. "But it certainly was funny," Alice said afterwards, when she was telling her sister the history of all this, "to find myself singing, 'Here we go round the mulberry bush.' I don't know when it began, but somehow I felt as if I'd been singing a long time."